What's going on, everybody? Good afternoon. Hope you guys are doing well on this hump day. Just one more day to get through before we get to a little bit of football tomorrow night. And I know I said a couple times earlier today that I would make a video with the practice report for the Seahawks. Well, we're not getting one. I forgot that since the game is on Monday night, we are not required to produce an injury report until Thursday because instead of going Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it goes Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So today is a practice day for the Seahawks, but they're not required to produce any kind of injury report. They're not required to say anything about any of these players. And Mike Macdonald has already said a couple hours ago that he's not going to be saying anything about guys like Murphy, Walker, Big Cat, Nwosu. So don't expect to hear anything there today. Tomorrow we will get the updates, obviously. Tomorrow will be just as informative as today would have been under normal circumstances. And presumably this also goes for the Lions, although it feels like there's a little less mystery with the Lions. It feels like they're just going to be missing a lot of players. It feels like they're just really, really beat up right now. Although we'll see where things go as the week goes on. But yeah, this tweet from Dugar outlines it pretty good. We're not going to really learn anything today, so there will be no injury report. So I'm going to have to overpromise and under deliver a little bit here because I said I would talk about the injury report later today, and I guess I won't. Although there's really not much I can do about that, right? So, in lieu of discussing that, since there's not really going to be anything else to discuss, it is nice to have the extra day, though, right? Because we've got a lot of players who may or may not be able to work their way back this week, and the extra day should help. I do want to do a plug for a really good article that got posted this morning to ESPN from Brady Henderson. Brady Henderson, obviously one of the Seahawks-centric writers over on ESPN. He posted an article early this morning titled How Mike Macdonald is Guiding the Seahawks Post Pete Carroll. It's pretty long. It's much longer than the typical Brady Henderson article. Most of the articles he posts are just like news updates where he just tells us, oh, this thing happened and this thing is happening as a result of that. Here's a quote, and then you move on. This article is not like that. This article actually goes in depth into the process of the Seahawks replacing Pete Carroll and what Mike Macdonald is doing so far. Not just in terms of like the high level stuff, like, oh, the Seahawks are 3-0, so he's doing at least that good, right? It goes a little bit deeper than that. There's a little bit more going on than just that. So I'm not going to go through the article on video here. There were some things that definitely caught my attention here, but if you are a Seahawks fan and you're appreciating the Mike Macdonald era so far, I definitely think it's a really good read. It's obviously much more fun to read when things are going well than it would be if things are going poorly. But yeah, definitely check this out. It's just posted to ESPN. Search up Brady Henderson. It'll come up. It'll obviously be right now the most recent thing that he's written for the website. But it kind of outlines a few different things that caught my attention. For one, you have the dichotomy, the strong dichotomy of the way Pete Carroll did things, where he was very player friendly and he was very lax and he didn't really discipline the way that some coaches do, versus the way Macdonald is doing things so far, where he's been a much more strict disciplinarian, which I think that, speaking just generally, you want to try to mix things up when you make changes, right? And in some regards, when you go from Carroll to Macdonald, you're not mixing it up because they're both defensive minded coaches. So the fact that you're mixing it up in terms of coaching style, where you have Pete Carroll, who is a very player friendly coach, he is very lax. He doesn't really get on players. He's not somebody who's going to be very strict with the players. I think that when you have that for 14 years, it's a pretty good idea to switch things up and go to a disciplinarian for your next coach, because when you make the change, you should be making the change for a reason, right? You should be making the change because you're trying to do things differently. You're trying to switch things up a little bit. So the article talked a little bit about the way in which Macdonald handled his business in camp. The really, really difficult conditioning drills that he would do, that players could not be activated until they could pass. This probably explains why some of the players that were added to the, I think it was either the PUP or the NFI list at the start of camp, were cleared after like 1 or 2 days. They probably failed the conditioning test, and they had to do it again the next day and actually pass it. So that's one great example. Players are getting fined $500 for minor offenses like showing up 1 minute late for a meeting. Players are getting fined for failing various elements of like a conditioning test, little things here and there. So you can see the clear difference there. It also talked a little bit about how Macdonald impressed the Seahawks so much by acing the in-person interview section of the interview process, which stood out because a lot of the other people they looked at were really good on like the Zoom meeting, the virtual meeting, but then they struggled with the in-person meeting part, whereas Macdonald was able to nail the in-person part, and that's a big reason why he's the coach right now. And he excuse me, he it kind of felt like, obviously they didn't name any names, but it kind of felt like that was a little bit of a shot at Ben Johnson, because it seemed like Ben Johnson was not a very good interviewee, and it seemed like he really struggled with that part of it, and that's why he didn't get a head coaching job this cycle. And it felt kind of like they were talking about him when they were talking about the in-person interview struggles that a lot of the candidates had. So definitely interesting to note that that's how Macdonald got the job, acing the in-person interview process. And there's a lot of other good stuff in this article as well. Again, you should definitely read the whole thing on your own. I'm not going to recap the whole thing here. But, what I will say is that Mike Macdonald has established himself as being more of a disciplinarian than Pete Carroll ever was. We saw that public-facing a couple months ago when some of the rookies were trying to bail on a training camp session early before signing autographs for a bunch of the fans who had stayed at camp to meet some of the players, and he demanded that they go over there and do their duties with the fans. Stuff like that Pete might have just let slide because he figures, they're working hard, whatever. But there's also a balance to strike there, right? There's also a very important line that you have to walk with being a disciplinarian. And it seems like Macdonald has found that, because we know from earlier this offseason, remember, he gave the Seahawks days off of training camp because he decided he was happy with what he saw. The last, I want to say 1, maybe 2 days of training camp that would have been attended by fans and been open to the media got canceled because he was like, I think I like what I see here. I don't think I need to see any more. So everybody go home and rest up. And if you guys make me happy, I'm not gonna push you too hard. And in fact, I'm even gonna give you guys a little bit of a break. So when you're talking about like fierce disciplinarians, guys who are really, really tough with their players, that wears itself out very quickly unless you're winning consistently. That works for a guy like Bill Belichick when he's winning, right? When Bill Belichick is winning 6 Super Bowls across less than 20 years, it works. When he's winning the division every year, it holds up. But as soon as the Patriots stopped winning, you saw the players just got sick of it and decided they weren't going to deal with it anymore, and now Belichick's out of a job. And I know he's probably going to find a job next year, but if the results are not immediate, look for that to be a very short-lived tenure. Look for that to not last very long and not be very successful, because in order to be like a Bill Belichick coach, you have to be winning. So I look at a Mike Macdonald, and one thing I do want to say about what we're hearing about him so far, about him being a disciplinarian compared to Pete Carroll, which I totally like. But the thing that strikes me is that there's also, it's not a Bill Parcells thing. It's not a Tom Coughlin thing. We've seen coaches like that have great success, of course, but most of their success has been in the old days of football, right? Belichick might be the exception, and even he, by the end, excuse me, wow, starting to lose my voice here. I barely said anything today. Crazy. But even he by the end wasn't really having success. It was minimal success, right? And by the end of the year, he was presiding over one of the worst teams in football. So that can burn itself out quickly. So the important thing that Macdonald's going to have to find here, because the losses are going to come. This team is not going to go 17-0. This team is not going to have an undefeated season. This team is not going to go 15-2 either. This team is going to lose some games at some point this year. This team is going to lose games and go on winning streaks at points during the next several years of Mike Macdonald as a head coach. And when those losses come, I hope he's able to find the right note. And so far, I'm very encouraged with what I see. He's not just being a hard ass for the sake of being a hard ass. He's doing it because he thinks it's the right thing to do in certain situations. It's like that Phil Jackson philosophy, right? Phil Jackson, when he got the Lakers job, he looked at Shaq and he looked at Kobe and he realized, I'm going to have to be a very different kind of coach for these two players because they are so different in personality styles. I'm going to have to be Shaq's friend and I'm going to have to be kind of sort of Kobe's enemy. And Kobe's going to end up resenting me for it, but it'll push him to be great. And while it was bumpy and there were bad moments, in the long run, you have to say that it worked. So there's going to be a right tone to strike at certain points. And the thing that really encourages me so far of what we've seen of Macdonald is it seems like he has a good feel for that. It seems like that he'll have an understanding of not just being somebody that these players grow to despise when the losses come. He has compassion about him, and I think he can find the right balance. And that is something that I think is very, very valuable in the modern NFL. All right, see you guys later. Go Hawks. Let me know what you think. Check out this article on ESPN.